And I'm the managing partner at CeedCap. Today, we have a very interesting guest with us that will be walking us through the topic for our maiden edition for Build. But before we get into that, I would just like to touch on what Build is. At CeedCap, our goal is to build companies that are able to transform traditional processes and move them into the digital economy. And we felt that as a modern day company that is focused on entrepreneurship and human capital, it would be great to create conversations around the ecosystem of startup studios, what we are, and also how the startup studio model works for so many of the people that have been asking a lot of questions about the model, and particularly because it's one of the models that we find sustainable, given the current climate, given the current economic pandemic and conditions, where we need to build businesses that can thrive and future ready. So Build is an initiative that CeedCap came about with to connect the communities of founders, entrepreneurs, and also investors on the process that we do undertake to build companies. So this session, we have Nick Zasowski, who is the who is the director at GSSN. And before Nick became the director of GSSN, Nick was with GAN. GAN being the Global Accelerator Network, which focuses on helping accelerators to build better operational practices across human capital and financial capital. Nick has spent his career across working and supporting different startups in the US. And so I think it was about last year when we found out that there was this community that enables the mandate that CeedCap represents, and also represents a very wide and supportive community of startup studio globally. And so that conversation led us to becoming members, and we were like one of the first members out of Africa. And to extend that network beyond the Western market, we felt it would be also great to educate the African audience with what the studio model is. And we think for this edition, there is no other community or person of Nick to open up this session to sort of like talk us through what the startup studio means. And like I said, just a bit of background. In 2019, African startups raised over $1.34 billion, which is profound. And that's like the highest yet. And then we look at different models that has allowed these businesses to thrive. A lot of people will be familiar with the incubator model. A couple of people will be familiar with the accelerator model. But the startup model, which we believe was pioneered by Ideal Labs, right? Which is way back in 1996, right? And they started building different companies. And so that model has been around for a while, but today we've sort of created like an operational model that allows us to not just invest in early stage businesses, but sort of help them build from ground up till they become sustainable businesses that we can ship either to exit or to help them raise their next round of capital that they need to remain sustainable and competitive. So I know I've said a lot so far. Today is about Nick walking us through that model. I'll be asking a few questions. The ground rules is that you can leave your questions in the comment section, and towards the end of the session, I'm hoping that Nick will be able to touch on that. So without wasting so much of our time, Nick, welcome to this part of the world. It's interesting that with COVID-19, we had to improvise, and that improvisation meant that digital conferences, digital tools are replacing how global conversations are shaping out. And I'm so excited that you're able to make out the time to join us. I think it's about like 8 a.m.
Oh, man, you're just...
Where you are?
Oh, that was somebody else, I think, not on mute.
Oh, it's cool. So I said it's about like 8 a.m. thereabout, and I'm saying thank you so much for making that time to join us on this conversation. So Nick, the startup studio model, right? A lot of people have different conception, different ideas. They see the buzzwords here and there. And we know it's a lot of interesting startups that we work with, but how did the journey come about for you, particularly as Nick, right? Venturing into working with entrepreneurs, working with startups to help them build, better businesses, and then how you transition from the Global Accelerator Network into the Global Startup Studio Network. So if you could just walk us through and, a bit of introduction about yourself as well, what GSSN represents, what you do, that would be great for our audience. So over to you, Nick.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and great to join everybody this evening. I do think it's a unique opportunity with COVID and these virtual events to be able to just immediately connect with the African ecosystem. So versus having to travel, I think maybe being in person all the time was too much of a bottleneck. So it's cool to be able to join everybody this evening. So yeah, a little bit. So GAN is an accelerator network of 120 accelerators around the globe, with 13,000 startups in that network. And then GSSN, we're a network of the world's leading studios. So we have 8 studios from around the globe, CeedCap being one of them and leading the way for startup studios in Africa. And really excited to be here today and talk through it. But really want to just start by defining what studios are to GSSN and the reason why we are a curated network, and working with CeedCap because they fit this criteria. But really for studios are company creators, company builders. So Cass and I were joking that studios are in the business of building businesses. So you're teaching companies to scale and then scaling how to scale companies. So that's one piece of it. And then second is providing the starting capital for startups as well. So studios have their own skin in the game. So after they create the company, they're actually investing in and helping these companies build and grow, which to the sustainability concept, having capital behind these startups from day one really helps them. And then third is resources, whether it's human, financial capital, providing that administrative support to these startups to get them off the ground. So similar to CeedCap, studios have this team, this bench of all-stars that are sitting there ready to support all of the startups that then they're creating so that they can scale and grow at a much faster rate. And studios also have those resources there available to make sure that they can focus and support these ideas that they're coming up with. So that's what studios are, just to level set everybody for today, and a little bit about GSSN. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Nick. You touched on a few of the interesting points that we'll be talking about on the topic, being that one of the key features or the unique features of studios are the fact that speed, right? The ability to go to market as fast as possible, the ability to assemble the right team, the ability to sort of like source capital, where founders can now focus on the operationality of their businesses and then ensuring that they can validate as fast as possible as well. So speaking of speed, what is the landscape view that GSSN has currently for startups, right? From ideation process to exit process. Now, there's a lot that happen in that sort of like middle that a lot of people fail or a lot of people succeed. So how does the startup studio look at that landscape and provide some sort of structure around that?
Yeah, great question. Studios are really good at saying no, I feel like, and learning how to say no, whether it's ideas or customers or investors, helps them move faster. And what I mean by that is there's these stage gate processes that each studio puts into place. So with those stage gates, the studios are say, okay, we have a month to go through ideation, or they're constantly ideating and coming up with ideas. And then they have a week to 2 weeks of validating a company. So we're going to go look for customers. We're going to go look for investors that would be interested in this concept, or we're going to look for corporations that would be interested in this company or this idea as well. And instead of letting things linger, they're really good at setting bookmarks or bookends for that stage gate. Once that's over, or once 2 weeks has gone by, if you haven't gained traction, say no, okay, this isn't working in this market, let's move on to the next one. And then same thing for the next stage. Once you create it, are you able to get to the seed round or get your certain amount of revenue or customers within most are taking 6 to 18 months to get to that seed round. The average for studios, again, because of that foundation of having a core team working on ideas and big problems that need to be fixed, and then they've done the due diligence to validate that company's idea, then when they move to that company creation stage, a traditional startup from the day it's created to the day that the company reaches that seed round, for a traditional startup, that takes about 3 years. And for a startup coming out of a studio, that takes roughly 10 months. So the reason for that is because you have a team behind you that's helping with additional connections into that network that studios are really focused in. And the CEO and the founders of the company can really focus on building the company, building the products, and selling and finding customers. So that's a little bit behind the speed of studios.
Yeah, and so from the founder's perspective, because the way the conversation would go, when you look at speed, you have speed from the founder's perspective, you have speed from basically the business perspective, which is, and when you say from the founder's perspective, it's like how fast can they raise enough capital to validate, to get their product to market. And also from speed, from the investor's perspective, when you're investing in like an early stage business, while you're maybe coming in at the early stage as an angel investor or a family and friend or whatnot, you're also sort of like looking at how fast can this business be profitable. So how do founders in today's world, manage that leverage? Because obviously capital is one, very scarce, especially in this part of the world. And it's also important to be able to shape businesses that matter. So how has that balance been from your own, experience with working with different founders and how they feel about startup studios in general?
Yeah, so from that perspective, that's where I think there's one differentiator in working with studios, because if you're starting your company, you're looking for that family and friends around or the angel investing around to get going. That's a lot of nitty gritty work that the founder has to be doing. But studios, from the founder perspective, and really like, what does it mean from a founder's perspective to build a startup with a studio? You come in with the resources and those connections that you have, and then also that the studio has. So you're coming in, the global average for a startup on day one, they're starting with capital of around $300,000 is what we see on average. Granted, that's a global number, so it depends where you are geographically. But you do have all of that to start. So the CEO has a salary. You're not trying to bootstrap everything from the get-go. And then, so that's the financial capital side. And then the human capital side, you have all these resources. So studios are providing the resources for accounting, finance, legal, so that the administrative tasks that normally the traditional founder is having to also navigate on top of building the company, that the founders that co-found with studios and co-build with studios don't need to worry about that, because they have their foundation of resources backed by the studio so that they can build and grow. And then they're connected with those introductions, because just like CeedCap, every studio has their focus, and they're only going to build companies within there. And they've already done the vetting to know that this business is built to scale and has a market that's out there and is a big enough problem to be solving for, because that's the mentality of the studios. So
awesome. So and how is that also, when you look at that and you layer it to the investor's perspective of how they see this?
Yeah.
What is the reaction? What is the sentiment that globally you've received from investors, and what has been the conversation around investment in studio startups?
Yeah. So it's funny you say that. We're actually writing a white paper right now and doing some research with investors and studios and other asset classes like accelerators and incubators. And what one of our responses from an investor is that they hope that the studio news doesn't get out, because they're once it does, that everybody's going to be investing in the asset class. But having said that, the reason why is because they are these strong entrepreneurial teams that are building these companies, and team is a huge aspect that investors are looking at when they're looking at investing in companies. And then also, as we're getting results, the IRR, the average IRR of a studio, and granted, there's 560 studios in the world today. Just saw that number come across from a friend. But the average IRR from a survey that we did on 250 startups is roughly 53%, which is huge. And then traditional startups is around 21% IRR, and the leading early stage VC firms is right at about 30%. So seeing the numbers come in from the success of the startups is pretty important, or pretty eye popping. And yeah, I think one other piece is that these studios are focusing on a couple ventures per year versus taking a bunch of shots on board. So I think that's another reason for that.
Awesome. So just walk us through some of the success that, studios across the world are, some of the stories that you're sharing. I mean, you sit on top of that conversation. I mean, every other week we jump on this best practice calls where we share a bunch of information. But it would be great for the audience to see, from your own perspective as well, from the different engagement you have globally, what are the stories of startups within different studios, and how's the experiences been? I know you shared a couple of interesting stories with me this week when we're talking about some of the studios that we do admire from here, particularly eFounders, Coplex, and a couple of them. But it would be great to share stories, maybe a couple of examples of how studios have helped in that sort of like assembly line process, right? Because from our perspective at CeedCap, right, I was sharing with you that we designed our connector model, which is basically the ability to connect technology, with traditional market and the digital future. But beyond that, it's the middle class technology, right? Being able to ensure that technology can reach the last mile, and it's very inclusive. So we've seen that success in Latin America with Polymath Venture. You also told me about this. So it'll be great to hear examples from you, and then, give us insight on that. So while we're waiting, Nick, so your mic is on mute. So one sec, let me see. Sorry about this.
There we go.
Awesome.
Yeah, it just said the host needed to unmute me. So really the vision that I see with all of these studios is that I think that's where studios and the innovation piece came from. And a lot of today's conversation is that we're building strong startups, but the purpose of and the vision, and this is kind of GSSN's vision. I didn't touch on this at the opening, but it's to generate what's the best way to build consistent, successful startups and ventures to create more jobs and more wealth to help strengthen the economy and the ecosystems that we're all in, so that the whole society is benefiting. And what we've seen from research is that startups are the best way to create that new wealth and those new jobs. So when you touch on some of these other studios or stories, for one example, eFounders, they have a startup. It's called Aircall. And they're planning on creating 100 more jobs over the next 6 months as their companies are growing. So I think that's one thing that's exciting, and it's because when they had this idea and they were able to move fast as a startup, they were able to move into this digital meeting space and saw an opportunity, and were able to move because studios are creating companies from scratch, and now it's generating all this wealth and these job opportunities in the European ecosystem. Another one is Snowflake, and we were talking about that earlier on the call today. There's a studio called Sutter Hill Ventures, and they created a company in Snowflake, and really what with that, they exited, or they IPO'd for $70.4 billion earlier this.
So this is like the biggest news in the studio industry, like 70 point.
Yeah. So they're just another successful startup, and to your point around it being a factory, like these aren't the only startups that these companies are building. eFounders, they have 25 companies in their portfolio, and their portfolio is worth $1.25 billion. That's the valuation of it. So it's just one of 24 other stories with Aircall of the companies they're building. But going back to your question around the factory piece or the startup piece, there's really five criteria, I think, that these studios are moving startups through. And first is that when they co-create these companies, they have that network effect. So studios have, working with a studio, you have this additional network that you're able to build and expand on, and network with all these other leaders in the ecosystem. Second is they give the startup the spotlight. So a lot of these studio names, unless you're in the studio world, you probably won't know who they are, but you'll know they're startups. So Snowflake is one, Aircall is one. In the US, I only know the US market better, but you have Dollar Shave Club, which was a company that went from zero to $1 billion unicorn in 13 months. So you hear about all these startups, and it's because the studio knows that behind it, you need to continue to do that. And then the third piece of the factory is making sure you do have capital. So if you are going to start a studio, you have to have capital to be able to support these startups as they go. And then fourth is just the team building aspect. So being able to leverage, again, to that network effect, the people and the expertise and the subject matter expertise in the industries that you're trying to build these companies in. And then that leads into the fifth one, which is the industry knowledge. A good studio will have a focus, because there's a lot of, in both the accelerator and the studio world, if you're agnostic, then it may be too broad and you can't really focus and support the startups in the way that they may need during that inflection point of their growth. So that's kind of the factory piece.
That's pretty much the. So you just unboxed the studio model, which is from providing financial capital to teams, to network access, to essentially providing all the toolkits, if you will, that they require to be faster and become more sustainable. So looking at the teams, I mean, for us at CeedCap, I think one of the areas that we find very interesting in this model is how to help entrepreneurs assemble teams fast, because most co-founders are either very technical or very business savvy. And so most of the time, recruiting the right balance is usually the challenge that we've seen in this part of the world. So what are the kind of challenges that you've seen in the startup ecosystem in general that studios have addressed the best, right? So we know there are incubator models, accelerator models, and studios being these asset classes doing it different. But which challenge does the studio model address, more effectively in your view?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple. So one is setting a foundation for the startup to grow and scale successfully. Studios are entering in with the mindset or the foresight of this company is going to be a large corporation someday. So how do we lay a foundation to prepare this team? And it's a very professional way of approaching starting these companies. And the second piece, which it goes back to the beginning of it, is the ideation and validation of the startups. So when looking at ideas, it's really easy to chase after something that you get emotionally tied to or excited about. And I would actually say that's one of the challenges too, that studios face in working with entrepreneurs and founders is that if somebody gets tied to an idea, or when they hire a founder that gets really excited about an idea, studios are really good at pivoting and moving to where the ball is going to be. But so studios are really good at pivoting and making sure they're addressing the market needs. And then that also raises to these challenges depending on hiring the right people. Because if you don't and they're not flexible, then you have that tension. So it's really important. Studios are really, really good at taking an objective approach versus an emotional approach to startups. It is that factory mentality, or that business data minded oriented mentality at building companies, and making sure you have all the right people and the right seats for the team. So
awesome. So I would move this from the angle of startups, now moving it into corporate innovation. Reason being that, within the studio practice, we have corporate studios, we have startup studios, pretty much doing the same thing, right? And with the idea to leapfrog businesses from traditional processes into that digital ecosystem. How instrumental, I think that's the first part of the question, are corporate studios or startup studios in this game, and as well as given the cost of innovation and the need to innovate, how well does the studio model sit in the corporate angle, and what are the examples that we see today? Because there's a lot of startup studios across the world helping companies move fast, launch new businesses, innovate business lines. You sit again at that sort of like apex view with 26 different studios who are building companies and building for great organizations and whatnot. So just walk us through what the corporate side of this story looks like, because people look at the startup studio from, oh, okay, it's just for startups, right? What is the business model there? So there's also this angle that I would love you to share more light on.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's just like everybody is moving to that conversation on the corporate front around the world. One book I would recommend for everybody is New to Big, from one of the authors is Christina Wallace, and they've been working. They're big in consulting in corporate innovation, and they talk about the tie between the CVC, the accelerator, and the studio, and how they all play together. So I think that's a very unique book and unique perspective. And it does make me think and want to address that there are places in the startup ecosystem for studios, for accelerators, and for VCs. So we're not like removing any of these from the startup ecosystem. It's just studios now, with them being a new way of building companies, have been plugged in and figuring out their place. So, and I think that leads in great to the corporate conversation, because where studios play a role with corporations, I think has only been accelerated with the COVID-19 world, because now when you work with accelerators, or you're looking for mergers and acquisitions, you're looking at companies that already exist, have been building and growing, and are their own entity for months, years on end. But with studios, you get to build something from scratch. So now there are a million new problems in our world that either we're facing as consumers, or businesses are facing as they do their work. And having a studio as part of your corporate innovation strategy is really important, because it allows you to be flexible and take market share very quickly. Because if you can build, for example, a story is better for this. One of the members in GSSN is Pioneer Square Labs. They're based out of Seattle, and they partnered with a corporation called Fortive. Fortive is a big manufacturing company, and they were having a hard time getting all of their employees back into their plants. So they needed to solve for something. So they partnered with Pioneer Square Labs. They started a studio together, and their first company that they built was this testing software to test all of the employees that were coming into the manufacturing plant so they could safely start allowing employees to come back to work and be able to do that.
Oh, this sounds like one of our portfolio that we sent to you, the Safe Tracks one, right?
Yeah.
I think we should apply this to the corporation as well. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, I meant to call that out too, because I remember you did that with them, and both of you did the same thing. They were able to launch it in 6 weeks time, and you guys were able to launch that in a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
And what CeedCap is doing with SafeTracks is you're able to move and navigate to the world's needs immediately. So being able to do that and seeing that flexibility for a corporation that's huge and moves slow, that's where CeedCap can come in and help sit on the outside of all of the corporate layers and structures and slow moving parts to innovate and move quickly, both to impact the company, and then now they're selling to other manufacturing companies around the U.S. too. So, Kes, you need to talk to TA. So, and partners.
So TM will be joining one of our build sessions. He actually confirmed a couple of weeks ago. So it would be a great conversation just hearing how in 6 weeks. And I think they're doing like impressive numbers right now. I mean, it's barely 3 months and that has been out. But yeah, so I like how you touch on, the whole essence of studios just being right on the outside to sort of have this sort of inside-out approach, right? And I think that's the real strength of the speed that comes with studios. So again, just for the sake of understanding that process, because when we talk about the due diligence process, right? Because we've received a ton of emails with people saying, oh, I've got this idea, I just want the studio to build this. And then we come back to say, I mean, for us, we're focused on businesses that are connecting real solutions and, real challenges and providing solutions to that through technology. So, and we go through this, very meticulous processes of saying, we need to do this, we need to do that, and sort of like fits into that connector model I emphasized on earlier. But I'm sure there are timelines, and I know you mentioned something about, typically it takes a studio, right, about 10 months. I think we try to do it now in like 9 months, because we've kind of created a model and a formula to this, right, where we know these are all the resources we need. We just need to layer this, this on that, and that sort of works. So we're trying to even collapse that time as fast as possible so that we're able to validate new business models and roll them out into the market very quickly, get feedback, and then, roll them out as businesses that have, firm roots. But what does that timeline look globally, right? What is that timeline, and how has that helped different entrepreneurs that I might be thinking, is the studio route my option, or should I just apply to incubators? And we've had people who've tried to apply to incubators, get refused, and then come back to the studio and like, I want to do this. And we've emphasized that it's not really a competition between which model. It's more of like, which model works for the business you're trying to build, the audience you're looking at. So that's timeline for studios, right? What does it look like in technical terms when an entrepreneur is considering their options and saying, should I go for a studio or should I go for an incubator or maybe an accelerator?
Yeah, so I would definitely say if you're curious about an idea or looking to start something, reach out to whoever your local studio is, because the studios are normally on the earlier stages of the work. And then if you already have a company and let's say you have a couple of customers or you're already moving and going, accelerators are really there to provide mentorship and resources to connect you. If you're the founder that this is my baby, I want to continue to run this company as my company, and all I need is a few connections, and I feel like that'll get me over the hump to keep going. So that's probably the accelerator founder. And then for the studio perspective, a lot of studios even provide programs that are called EIR programs. Does CeedCap do EIR program, Kes?
Actually, that's something we're rolling out come first quarter next year. We're piloting that model. It's something interesting for us as well.
So, and for those of you on the call, what an EIR is an entrepreneur in residence. And this provides an opportunity to help the studio wherever they need help in building out their next venture. You may not be the founder or the CEO, but it allows you an opportunity to see how CeedCap works. And then it allows CeedCap the opportunity for, let's say, 3 months to learn how you work, if you're a culture fit for each other, and if the studio model makes sense for the entrepreneur. And I do think that's a great route that a lot of studios are moving towards. If you've already worked through your closer knit network that you knew you had those founders, it's a new way for studios to meet entrepreneurs, and it's a new way for entrepreneurs to, like, you're all on this call learning about studios today, but to really learn about the inner workings and what do these processes look like, and how much time does it take, and would I want to be part of this? So that's a great way to get connected. And if CeedCap, or when CeedCap does open it, I would highly recommend, if you're looking to start your next thing, to reach out to Cass and try to figure out what that looks like. So
awesome. Just to remind everyone on the call that, if any of this conversation pops a question in your head, please feel free to use the chat box to send any of your questions. I'm sure we'll be able to take them on this call. And if we cannot take them, definitely we would be putting up a post after this with Nick's responses. So Nick, what is the future like for startups, right? What is the future of venture building, right? So we know that the future is digital, right? It's technology first. Like, it's scary how over the past couple of years we've transitioned into an ecosystem of technology. And this is not even from the corporate angle, it's even from the individual angle. You've got like your Apple Watch, you've got some headphones in your head, and it's sort of a lot of data being generated that is being captured about the human race. And to remain competitive, we see that the future of the human race is about layering solutions that connect people. Yeah. But what do you see as that future, and how venture builders, also, known as startup studios, are create? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, specifically to venture building in the future, this is a very innovative way of building companies. Every company that's been built before us started with somebody's idea, and they've just collaborated to keep growing it and expanding the company. But this is a very innovative way as far as how the company is structured. It's really a team around this concept or this problem that we're solving for to create a company. And then also, second, on the investment side, it's not a traditional VC investment. So it's actually challenging a lot of venture capitalists that are used to their standard term sheets, that, hey, there's more people involved in creating and building this company, and it's okay, and the incentives are a little bit different, but everybody is entering into this aligned, and it's getting the investors on board to understand that there's a reason why this cap table looks like this, and it helps these companies move and solve problems faster. And I think when we talk about the future of startups, startups are going to start either replacing corporations, or they're able to be more nimble. So they're going to be bigger disruptors because they have these solid teams like CeedCap behind them that can help them grow and make an impact a lot faster, which will cause a lot of disruption in a good way. Disruption in a good way. And so that's where I think it's going. So
I feel like if you're not disrupting industries, then you're going to be stuck in the past, really, because everything about innovation is more or less, like you said, someone's idea and someone really challenging the status quo and the assumptions that were previously strongly held. I
would just say really quick and touching on the corporate stuff, the times of corporate innovation just being mergers and acquisitions and research and development, I believe are over. You have to be proactively, like, you have this idea, instead of buying a company that solves for 70% of what the market needs, people are going to start building for 100% of what the market needs, and it's going to really solve for it. And that's how companies are going to really, really take advantage and gain market share. So, yeah.
Awesome. So someone asked the question around EIRs, which is entrepreneur in residence, and how do you find them? So particularly, I think this is more or less for how do we find these people? What is our criteria? I think for CeedCap, we have like a very solid criteria that we look for in founders and in entrepreneurs in general. But also, what do you look out for in this person or people or group or team that want to be an entrepreneur in residence?
Yeah. So there's a couple ways you can go, and I would start it with creating a criteria, just like you would for hiring for your own team. And from an EIR perspective, studios take a couple of approaches, and it sounds like when you get like TA or other specific studios on these calls, you'll get their specific responses and answers. From GSSN, we just see the global narrative, so I'll share that. But certain studios are looking for somebody with a technical background. Others are looking for CEOs without a technical background because their studio team fills those gaps. So that's one piece. When you're looking for suitable EIRs, look for people that fill the gaps that your studio might have. Second would be studios look for entrepreneurs that either have experience and have sold, raised money, exited a company, know how to scale, do all of those pieces of the startup puzzle. And then other studios, very other side of the spectrum, look for somebody that's never run a company before, because they want to be able to mold how this whole process is going to go, and they have their structure. And the studio knows what to do. Let's just plug in the CEO. That's a great visionary, great leader of a person, and then they can just go and run. And then finally would be culture. You're marrying this essential founder with your studio and this company. So having a culture fit is really important, because if you don't align as far as values go with this founder, it's going to be a very rough marriage. So making sure that you align culturally is very important. So,
yeah. That also ties, go on. You want to say something?
I was going to say to the marriage concept, the EIR piece is almost like the dating phase of it. So you're allowed to kind of feel each other out and get that opportunity. So that's why the EIR piece is a great opportunity. So, yeah.
Awesome. So someone asked a question saying, what are the kind of startups we see coming out of the studios? And I think there was one GSSN call that we had that was more about this question in particular. Like, there's a trend of startups. So from Polymath looking at middle class technology startup, and like what you said in terms of very vertically focused. But again, globally, what do you see as the kind of for us at CeedCap, what it is that we look for marketplaces, we look for opportunities in different side of the market, either the digital space or the traditional space, and see how we can create, or solve the missing middle gap. So, what do you see with the studio trend globally?
Yeah, so globally, and this is to a little bit of the what I believe is the purpose for startups, is as they grow, they generate jobs and wealth for their local economies. What does your local ecosystem need? So Polymath, they're in Colombia. They're building technology to support the widespread use of now technology in the middle class in Latin America. High Alpha in the US is working on B2B SaaS products. CeedCap is working on marketplaces and how to support that. And it's what are the less looking at ideas, but more looking at what are the problems that exist in your market, and going out and solving for those through business. So I would say that's probably the best way to go about that.
Yeah, I think there's this follow-on question, which is, should startup studios specialize? I think that's pretty much what we were touching on earlier. And if they don't specialize, are there studios that have the generalist approach that
Mhm.
they take in as many businesses? And I think that's interesting because once you have the formula and the framework, I think that's the beauty of studios. Like it's literally sort of like breaking down the businesses into different sizes and
Mhm.
finding what is required for this part to work and then assembling that for startup. But again, which model works best, and what do you think about specialization? That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say which one I've seen work best is studios that specialize, because it allows you to have a focus, and constraint breeds creativity. So with that constraint, then you can focus on that area to solve for problems. And what I've seen with general studios is it's so broad that a lot of the strengths that a studio brings to a startup start to fall apart. So you can't look for investors that focus in a certain area. You can't look for founders that focus in a certain area because you're looking for anybody and everybody. And then the studio itself, if you're general, there's no unique advantage or unique advantage that you're gonna bring to this startup that maybe somebody else will, that's really focused and knows a certain focus or market very, very well and is very connected. So if I'm a generalist and I'm trying to start a company in Lagos, Nigeria, and CeedCap is doing the same in a specific market, in a specific vertical, and has all the connections in there, I can guarantee you CeedCap's going to win 10 times out of 10. So yeah, I think it just provides a lot more focus and opportunity. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Nick, for the questions. It's been a very interesting conversation so far. We're entering the last couple of minutes on the hour. So I would say like we sort of like bring this home, right, into more or less like what are the future plans for GSSN, for example. We know like you have a lot in terms of like shared best practices that you are layering for different studios across the world. I know the GSSN Summit is also coming back up, which is in October. And I know you're doing a lot of preparation to educate, create the awareness, and also ensure that entrepreneurs have like a model that is more sustainable. So what does the future plan look like for GSSN and for the different studios in terms of general practice that you're looking at?
Yeah. So, sorry, where is GSSN looking? I want to make sure I got the question right. Where is GSSN looking?
A basic future view of where GSSN sees the studio practice in general and how that affects all the players in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so very similar, and the reason why GAN, our parent company, bought GSSN and helped create this curated network is GAN actually started back in 2010 as the Techstars Accelerator Network. And it was back when accelerators were being formed and developed as this new asset class. And we see, and now today, there's over 10,000 companies around the globe that consider themselves accelerators or incubators. So we see studios being that next asset class in the next 10 years. So how can we come alongside studios and provide them with the resources that they need from a community perspective? So sharing operational best practices, introductions to human capital like new founders for studios or new team members, and then financial capital. We do have a fund and we're investing in startups coming out of GAN accelerators and GSSN studios and continuing to figure out what does that look like, as well as continuing to partner with corporates, because corporates have a lot of the money that are pushing and driving and creating sustainability for a lot of these programs. To the question, I see the final question, the ROI on studios. That's what we're seeing a lot of, because a lot of these studios are funds. So if you're a fund, your ROI, you're waiting on your fund to return. So we see average exits between 3 to 7 years. So that's your fund when your fund starts returning. But we see studios working with corporations to create that sustainable model over time, because corporations are paying studios to help them build out their next ventures. So hopefully that answers that question too.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. I think that brings me to my own last question, right? Which covers the launch steady, right? Because there is this notion of speed, where speed is like either too fast, too soon. But we've been able to look at the model and realize like speed is one of the most competitive advantage that startup have over corporations, right? So, but one thing with speed is the stability of building, right? So from your perspective, right, how do startups generally ensure that when they move with speed, they're able to maintain that balance? And I think the balance I'm looking at here is the sustainability balance. Like, how does this move down? So for us, for example, we're looking at ultimately creating over 500,000 jobs by 2050, and pretty much ambitious and audacious commitments to Africa. But we've seen how that would work. We understand how we will be able to do that. And doing that means we'll be able to create a sustainable practice that we could layer the different founders on. But what do you see as a path for sustainability for founders generally, and then for studios to keep ensuring that startups don't fail? The success rate increase beyond 10% every other year than what we see currently. So how's that sustainability part looking from a GSSN standpoint?
Yeah, great question. So quick data point. What we see in the startups and the GSSN community specifically is that companies that are created, 84% of those companies created reach the seed round of funding. So that is astronomical compared to traditional startups. And to the sustainability question, the reason why is because any problem you're trying to solve, studios are trying to solve for problems. So the whole ideation, a lot of the work is done in the ideation and validation stages before the company's even created. So they may be thinking through hundreds of company ideas, business ideas, but really what they're doing is they're focusing in on problems and then trying to work backwards to see what company will solve for that problem, versus starting with an idea, creating a company, and then realizing through the process that the company's not going to work. But what we've seen and what we're seeing studios do, and the reason why that 84% number is because studios are starting with problems that are needs that need to be addressed in the market. So start with something big like healthcare issues right now with coronavirus, and then start to work back. Well, what are some of the problems that are taking place because COVID exposed it, right? And then what does the world need from a business perspective to go from there? So
awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Brilliant session, Nick. I think
thanks for having me.
It's been a lot of mind-opening numbers, examples, insights into the model, and it's really great for us because as I said earlier during the introduction, this being the first edition of CeedCap Build, where our interest is in not just educating the general audience within the old startup ecosystem and exposing them towards a new or kind of like a better model, if you will, to build businesses. And we really appreciate the time and the knowledge sharing that to pass on today.
Yeah, and I want to thank CeedCap for hosting these calls and just sharing more about the model, because it is still very nascent, and it's exciting to see the momentum that's building, and it's only because of studios like you all both sharing it with others and being collaborative and also doing it the right way so that it does continue to work. So I appreciate you opening up the mic for us to share today. So
thank you so much.
Yeah.
So on behalf of the CeedCap team and all the audience that have participated in this session, we're very thankful. And I'm sure that we'll be sending out the links to this call so that you could rewatch and pick on insight that you might have missed. And also, I think Nick is working on a white paper that I mentioned earlier, so we'll also be sharing this with our community as well. On that note, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a fantastic time hosting you all. We do wish you a very wonderful weekend, and have a great time, Nick.
All right, have a good one. Thank you so much, and yeah, have a good rest of your night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.